Hello my friends, this is the Grand Duke Dmitri video series. We're in 1939 today, and unfortunately I just have to throw up my hands with this one and say, oh Dmitri, because there is some pretty brazen lying going on. You can make of it what you will, but before we get going with that, our recap in 1915. In yesterday's video, we had Dmitri's arrival in Moscow and his getting together with Johnson, with Nikolai Johnson, Grand Duke Michael's aide, and talking after a play to the huge cast at the Molly Theater, and amongst them, as I discovered, was a very important person. So Elizaveta Timma, who was someone almost uniquely, if I remember correctly, Dmitri said that he was able to pour his heart out. And he was upset when rumors started that she'd gotten married in 1918. And of course, he'd never had any intention of marrying her himself. She hadn't even been his girlfriend. That was Karalit. But all the same, we can see how important she was to him. 1939. Well, we had Fayard, the journalist for Candide, telling us, filling his readers in a little bit about the branches of the imperial family that were then active in primarily the Vladimirovichi on one side and the Pavlovichi, Dmitri and Maria on the other side, although he was including Andrei with Dmitri and Maria. Okay, our cast today. Well, we have Vladimir Kirillich, we have an unnamed British colonel, and then likewise unnamed British chief of staff. I may have overlooked someone. I don't think so, but we'll see. So let's dive in. You will recognize the lies, I think, and then we'll talk about them. Okay. Needless to say, no offer was... Oh, sorry. I need to say at first that this is Dmitri talking. So this is in quotes. This is what he's saying to Fayard. Needless to say, no offer was made to Grand Duke Vladimir. Like you, we found out from the newspapers about the German project to create an independent Ukraine. I don't know what to tell you, if it's serious or if it's a simple trial balloon of the kind the diplomats across the Rhine are so fond of sending out. What I can tell you is how we're reacting. It was as clear as it was unanimous. The denial of Grand Duke Vladimir that you read in the newspapers was written in complete agreement with Grand Duke Andrei and myself. I am formally reiterating the essence of this statement today. It is out of the question that our family will agree to such a project, whether it is serious or not. And now Fayard says, the matter is apparently very delicate, Monseigneur. And Dmitri continues, you'll get a clearer picture of it when I explain our whole thinking to you. I am for the Russians. I am a patriot before being a political partisan. Do not think that the Bolsheviks can count on me as an unexpected supporter. Hear me well. This means I was Russian from day one. If Russia, even Soviet Russia, is attacked by a foreign nation, I stand with Russia, even Soviet Russia, against the aggressor. This stance flows from a profound feeling within me. Remember that in 1917, after the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, I finally succeeded, to my great pride, in obtaining a commission in the English Army, the 14th Hussars Regiment, to be precise. I need to make a note here on the date. I fought happily against the Turks. One day, my colonel ordered me to carry out a mission against the Russians. I refused and explained why. The colonel was surprised, but the chief of staff understood my scruples. I could only be used against the Turks, the Germans, or the Austrians. not against my own countrymen. And then Fayard says, a Frenchman cannot help but share your sentiments, Monseigneur. France has never completely forgiven the emigres of 1789, who returned with the armies of Brunswick. Okay, I am just very quickly, please forgive me, going to look up the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact because I have forgotten the precise date, and it's important. Okay, so it had not yet been signed yet. It would be signed in August 1939. All right, so Dmitri is clearly in the frame of mind that the Germans are a threat to Russia. There has been no alliance between them yet, but the British are seeking an alliance with Russia, and Russia seems to be interested. So it maybe would have been better to read this letter, which is from the 28th of December 1938, before, not letter, I should say, interview, before we read the Grunwald letter, which was June 1939, so a little less than 6 months after this letter. Maybe would have been better, because we hear Dmitri being much more anti-Soviet, not anti-Russian, although that's a bit equivocal in Grunwald, actually, whether he was he was, well, later on in his letters to Maria, he was saying, I am a patriot of Russia, or, sorry, I am a patriot of Europe. So he'd obviously sort of evolved a little bit on that question, but that comes later. All right, so the first lie, no offer was made to Vladimir. Well, an offer was made to Vladimir. There's proof of it at the Bakhmetov archive in New York City at Columbia University, and it's clear also from Grunwald's letter. But that's kind of an understandable lie, because it's not good, you know. This is not good. I mean, selfishly for the family, not wanting to be embarrassed, but also just they really, you know, the Nazis need to understand this unequivocally. So it's kind of an understandable lie. I mean, the whole point of this interview is to do damage control and to downplay everything, and so that's what's going on here. The trial balloon sent out by the Germans. That's interesting. I wish I knew specifically what he was, well, if there was something that he was specifically referring to. But, you know, he wasn't naive. Let's put it that way. He was following closely what was going on, and he saw through the various ruses that the Nazi government was engaging in. Now, Vladimir's statement, this we know about from Grunwald. So Vladimir tells us that this statement was actually very wishy-washy, and that even as it was wrested, it was forced from Vladimir by Dmitri, and Dmitri includes Andrei. So apparently Dmitri and Andrei together went to Vladimir and said, look, you are going to write a statement refuting all of this. And Vladimir did, and I'm a little surprised to hear that it was in the newspapers. I guess I shouldn't be surprised to hear, because I think Grunwald refers to sending newspaper articles and statements to Maria along with his letter. And if you recall, Grunwald said then that the statement was simply too equivocal. It was too wishy-washy, and that was precisely why Dmitri called his press conference and had this meeting with Fayard from Candide. So, you know, Fayard he's an experienced journalist, so he says, aha, I see this is a bit of a delicate matter, Monseigneur. I like the way he puts that. He probably knows that Dmitri is engaging in a cover-up with this. And then Dmitri launches into this interesting 2 paragraphs. And he starts out by saying, our thinking. And he's implying that it is the thinking of the whole imperial family, such as it is at that time. But immediately after talking about our thinking, he starts talking about my thinking. He starts using the personal pronoun I, and filling in Fayard on how he feels and what he thinks, and that Fayard needs to really pay attention to it. Listen to this, hear me. And so this subterfuge of our is gone, and now we know that this is Dmitri, primarily Dmitri. He starts out very, very interestingly by refuting the Bolsheviks. Now, if you recall, I've mentioned in the past that Dmitri had been accused of being a crypto-Bolshevik because of his involvement with Young Russia. The accusation had been made that he was himself a Bolshevik fellow traveler. And, this is actually a word that wasn't technically correct anymore. It definitely wasn't politically correct, because the Soviets wanted to distance themselves from things like killing Nicholas and Alexandra and the atrocities committed. And so they're no longer Bolsheviks, they're Soviets. Well, fair enough, because the state that was recognized by the other world powers was the Soviet Union, not the Bolshevik state. Yeah, okay. That's kind of a fine line, isn't it? But Dmitri clearly feels an absolute need to refute this. So that's the very first thing he says. The Bolsheviks cannot count on me for support. Well, yeah, okay, fair enough. But then it's sort of a contradiction after that, because he is saying that the Soviets can count on him, that he is taking this strong stance against anyone who would be a threat to or would actually attack the Soviet Union. That's a no-go with him. And after having made that little sort of necessary defense of himself in relation to the Bolsheviks, here he is very emphatically saying that since Russia is the Soviet Union, then he's going to be on board and arm in arm with the Soviet Union, because those are the Russians, not politically, but well, you get what he's saying. And so, let's see. I wish I had a diary entry or a letter that includes his reaction to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The rest of the 1939, well, the 1939 diaries up until the time he arrives at Shatzelp are pretty sporadic. So I have to look at that, because that'd be fascinating. So here's the real lie. Here's the one that really discourages me, and I just don't know how he justified this to himself, unless he'd kind of talked himself into believing it. But I doubt it. This is the idea that he received his commission in the British Army in 1917 and then immediately took up active service, because the 14th Hussars were, well, let me read to you what I found through AI about the 14th Hussars. So in 1918, the British 14th, or King's Hussars, were actively involved in Mesopotamia, present-day Iraq, and Persia, present-day Iran, during World War I. They were part of the Persian Cordon and participated in operations against Turkish and German-inspired factions. The regiment had previously served in major engagements like Kut, Sheikh Saad, and Hana in 1915 through 1917. So their biggest period of really serious combat was in 1917. Well, Dmitri did not receive his commission in the British Army until August 1918, at which point he was able to leave Persia and make his way to England. And before that, he'd been stuck as a stateless person, essentially, and unable to leave the place where he was. which was Persia. And yeah, so he missed all of this fighting. And in 1918, in 1918, the King's Hussars became part of Dunster Force, and Dunster Force was this big military unit led by General Lionel Dunsterville, this very colorful figure. There are books written about him. I think there's a book called Dunster Force. There are certainly biographies of him, and Dmitri got to meet him and got to know him a little, specifically in Baghdad. And at that time, Dunster Force was not active, and Dmitri was not part of Dunster Force, and he was not part of the 14th Hussars. And so this is just rubbish from beginning to end, and it doesn't serve any point except for him to sort of, make himself sound really, really, really good. My dog. So why did he do this? I don't know. You see this all the time. You see it with politicians, right? They make these idiotic statements, not to be partisan, but I remember the one that Hillary Clinton made about landing and getting out of the plane under fire in Bosnia or someplace. And, of course, nowadays it's no problem whatsoever to find out if these things are true or not. Trump does it all the time. And you wonder if these people just convince themselves that this is the truth. And I wonder if I think Dmitri had such feelings of guilt. I mean, survivor's guilt and, guilt about not having been able to do anything with his father. I think he just had really tremendous guilt, and his half-brother and Ella. And so I think he kind of had to try to convince himself that he'd done something active after the revolution had occurred, And another thing that apparently he did, I don't know for sure that it was him as opposed to Audrey, but somebody told Paul that Dmitri had gone back to Russia after the revolution, that he'd snuck in, that he'd, assumed the guise of an average citizen and snuck back into Russia and went to his palace and retrieved some things. And that actually is really insulting. I can't imagine Dmitri said it that way, because if he went into Russia while his father was still in prison and did nothing about that, just went and got some valuables from his palace and then went back, that would have been horrible. I mean, the whole thing is false from beginning to end. Dmitri did not go back to Russia. And I also found this story in his obituary for the New York Times. And so it was a story that was going around. And Paul Elinsky specifically asked me about it, and I said, look, we'll go through one by one the diary entries about Dmitri being in Persia and then leaving from Persia, going to Baghdad, and then to Egypt, India, and then to Egypt, and finally to France, and then Britain. And there's just it's a day-by-day diary account. And it was just completely false. And Paul had no problem with that. He understood, Yeah, so what was the old boy up to? Well, I've told you what my belief is, whether it exonerates him or not, that it was a defense against himself, how he could deal with the guilt. Anyway, yes, what do we have next time? We have, when we return to 1915, we have this very interesting, because Dmitri is going to talk to Ella, have a long, serious conversation with her, and Alexandra is going to be one of the topics. And also Brasova will make her first appearance. And then in 1939, Dmitri is going to talk at length about Russia, Stalin, and the Ukraine. Fascinating stuff. And, you know, he's definitely not behind the curveball when it comes to knowing what's going on. He's aware of what's going on in Stalinist Russia, for instance. So, yeah, I'm just really fascinated by all of this. I can't wait to include this scene in my novel. And, yeah, come back, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.